The autumn wind cut through the Wyoming valleys like a knife, carrying with it the scent of dying leaves and the promise of a harsh winter ahead. Samuel Crawford stood at the edge of his wife's grave, his weathered hands clutching a bouquet of wildflowers that Martha had always loved. The cemetery was quiet except for the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of grass bending in the breeze. It had been 3 months since Martha passed away from pneumonia, and Sam still couldn't believe she was really gone. Every morning he woke up expecting to find her humming in the kitchen, flour dusting her apron as she prepared breakfast for the ranch hands. Instead, he found only silence and the cold reality of empty rooms that once echoed with her laughter. The ranch house felt like a museum now. Martha's sewing basket still sat by her favorite chair, needles and thread waiting for hands that would never return. Her coffee cup remained on the kitchen table, exactly where she had left it on that final morning when the fever took hold. Sam couldn't bring himself to move anything. It felt like erasing her completely. The townspeople of Cedar Ridge meant well with their visits and covered dishes, but their sympathy only made the loneliness worse. Mrs. Patterson from the general store would stop by twice a week with fresh bread and concerned looks. "You need to eat more, Sam," she would say, noting his gaunt appearance. Martha wouldn't want you wasting away like this, but Sam barely tasted food anymore. Everything felt like sawdust in his mouth. He went through the motions of living because the cattle needed tending and the horses required care, but his heart wasn't in it. The ranch hands noticed the change immediately. Where Sam once joked and shared stories during the evening meals, now he ate in silence before retreating to his empty bedroom. Billy Thompson, his most trusted worker, tried to lighten the mood one evening. "Remember that time Martha caught you trying to milk Bessie backwards?" he asked with a grin. "She laughed so hard she nearly fell off the fence." Sam managed a weak smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, I remember," he said quietly, then excused himself from the table. The memory hurt too much. Every happy recollection felt like salt in an open wound. The nights were the hardest. Sam would lie awake listening to the house settle, remembering how Martha used to curl up beside him, her head on his chest while she told him about her day. She had a gift for finding joy in simple things. A new calf being born, wild roses blooming by the creek, or the way morning sunlight painted the mountains gold. Without her gentle presence, the ranch felt more like a prison than a home. Sam found himself talking to the animals, telling his old horse Charlie about decisions that needed making or sharing his troubles with the barn cats. It was easier than facing the pitying looks of his neighbors or the awkward silences that followed when someone mentioned Martha's name. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the ranch in thick snow that seemed to muffle even the wind. Sam's world grew smaller, confined to the essential tasks of keeping his livestock alive through the bitter cold. He lost weight steadily, his clothes hanging loose on his once strong frame. His reflection in the mirror showed a man aged beyond his 34 years, with hollow cheeks and eyes that had lost their spark. The local preacher, Reverend Collins, made regular visits bringing scripture and kind words. "Martha's in a better place now," he would say, settling into the chair across from Sam's kitchen table. "She's watching over you, son. She'd want you to find happiness again." Sam would nod politely, but inside he felt angry. How could there be happiness without Martha? She had been his anchor, his reason for working hard and building something meaningful. They had planned to have children, to watch their family grow on the land that had been in his family for 2 generations. Now those dreams lay buried with her in the frozen ground. The ranch hands worried about their boss. They whispered among themselves about his weight loss, his silence, and the way he sometimes stood staring at nothing for long minutes at a time. Jake Miller, who had worked for Sam for 5 years, finally spoke up during one of their evening meals. "Boss, maybe you should think about taking a trip somewhere," Jake suggested carefully. "Get away from here for a while. Clear your head." Sam looked up from his untouched plate. "This ranch is my life, Jake. I can't just leave it." "The ranch will still be here when you get back," Jake pressed gently. "But you're disappearing right before our eyes. Martha wouldn't want this for you." The mention of his wife's name made Sam's jaw tighten. "Don't tell me what Martha would want," he said sharply, then immediately felt bad for snapping at Jake. These men had been loyal to him and Martha both. They deserved better than his bitterness. Spring came reluctantly to Wyoming that year, but even the sight of new grass pushing through the last patches of snow couldn't lift Sam's spirits. He performed his duties mechanically, checking fences, moving cattle to fresh pasture, maintaining equipment. But the joy had gone out of the work that had once been his passion. One evening in late March, Sam found himself at Martha's grave again, something he did at least 3 times a week. The headstone was simple granite with her name, dates, and the words "beloved wife" carved in neat letters. He knelt beside the grave and pulled a few weeds that had sprouted near the base. "I don't know how to do this without you, Martha," he said aloud, not caring if anyone heard him talking to a grave. "Everything feels wrong. The house, the ranch, my whole life. I keep thinking you'll come walking through that door with one of your smiles, telling me supper's ready." The wind rustled through the cottonwood trees that bordered the cemetery, and for a moment Sam could almost hear Martha's voice carried on the breeze. She had always been the strong one, the one who could find hope in the darkest situations. During their worst year, when drought killed half their cattle and creditors threatened foreclosure, Martha had held him together with her unwavering faith that better days lay ahead. Now, sitting beside her grave as the sun set behind the mountains, Sam wondered if there would ever be better days again. He had money in the bank and a successful ranch, but what good were material things without someone to share them with? Martha had made everything worthwhile. Without her, he was just going through the motions of living, marking time until he could join her in whatever came next. The townspeople continued their well-meaning efforts to help Sam heal. They invited him to church socials, asked him to join hunting parties, and suggested he consider courting one of the available women in the area. But Sam couldn't imagine loving anyone else. Martha had been his whole world, and that world had ended the day they lowered her coffin into the ground. As he walked back to his empty house that evening, Sam felt the weight of his loneliness like a physical burden. Tomorrow would bring another day of the same routine, tending animals, checking fences, eating meals without tasting them. He had no idea that his life was about to change in the most unexpected way, or that hope could come from the most unlikely source. On the other side of Cedar Ridge, where the railroad tracks divided the respectable part of town from the forgotten corners, stood a 2-story building that most people preferred not to notice. The Mercy Home for Wayward Women served as both shelter and workplace for women who had nowhere else to go. Some were widows without family. Others were women who had made mistakes that society refused to forgive. All of them carried stories they rarely shared. Eleanor Hartwell had called this place home for nearly 3 years, and in that time, she had become as much a part of the building's foundation as the bricks and mortar themselves. Every morning at 5:30, she was the first to rise, lighting the wood stove and preparing coffee for the other residents. Her movements through the kitchen were efficient and quiet, careful not to wake those who had worked late into the night at the town's laundry or taking in mending. At 28, Ellie was older than most of the women who came and went through the Mercy Home's doors. While others stayed just long enough to get back on their feet or find husbands, Ellie had accepted that this would likely be her permanent home. The fire that had changed her life happened when she was only 7 years old, when their family cabin caught fire during a winter storm. Her father had saved her life, pulling her from the burning building, but not before the flames had permanently marked the right side of her face and neck. The scars had faded over the years from angry red to pale white, but they were still impossible to ignore. They stretched from her temple down to her collarbone, pulling at her skin and making her right eye appear slightly smaller than her left. Her right ear was partially gone, hidden beneath hair that she always wore long and loose on that side of her face. Growing up, Ellie had learned to read people's reactions in the first few seconds of meeting them. There was always the initial shock, quickly followed by pity or disgust, and then the awkward attempt to look anywhere but at her face. By the time she was 15, she had stopped expecting young men to call on her like they did other girls her age. By 20, she had accepted that marriage and children were not part of her future. But what others saw as disfigurement, Ellie had learned to work around. Her left profile was untouched by the fire, and when she smiled, which she did often despite her circumstances, her whole face lit up with warmth. More importantly, the experience of surviving such trauma had given her a deep empathy for others' suffering, and an unusual comfort with medical situations that made most people queasy. When old Doc Henderson had broken his leg 2 years ago and needed help at his clinic, he had reluctantly agreed to let Ellie assist him. What he discovered was that she had a natural talent for healing. Her hands were steady during procedures. She could follow complex instructions, and she never fainted at the sight of blood. More importantly, patients seemed to calm down when she spoke to them in her gentle voice. "You've got the touch. Girl?" Doc Henderson had told her after she successfully helped him set a broken arm for young Tommy Wilson. "Most folks think healing is just about knowing medicine, but it's really about making people feel safe. You've got that gift." Under Doc Henderson's guidance, Ellie had learned more about medicine than many trained nurses. She could clean and dress wounds, prepare herbal remedies, assist with births, and even perform simple procedures when the doctor wasn't available. She read every medical book she could get her hands on, often by candlelight after the other women had gone to bed. The residents of the Mercy Home had mixed feelings about Ellie's growing reputation as a healer. Some were proud that one of their own had found respect in the community. Others were jealous or resentful, feeling that Ellie was trying to rise above her station. The worst gossips whispered that it wasn't natural for an unmarried woman to know so much about bodies and birthing. "She thinks she's better than us," complained Nancy Roberts, a bitter woman in her 40s who had been at the home longer than anyone except Ellie. Walking around with her nose in the medical books, acting like she's some kind of doctor. But Mrs. Crawford, the kind widow who ran the Mercy Home, saw through the jealousy. "Ellie has made something useful of herself," she would say firmly when the complaints grew too loud. "She's helping people and earning honest money. That's more than some folks can say." The truth was that Ellie's medical knowledge had become invaluable to the Mercy Home itself. When one of the women fell ill or injured herself, it was Ellie they turned to first. She had successfully treated everything from severe cuts to difficult births, often preventing the need for expensive visits from Doc Henderson. Despite her skills and the respect she had earned from some quarters, Ellie remained painfully aware of her place in the social order. When she walked through town on errands, mothers would pull their children closer and men would tip their hats politely but avoid making eye contact. She was useful, tolerated, even appreciated, but she was not welcomed into polite society. The loneliness was the hardest part. While the other women at the Mercy Home formed friendships and shared dreams of better futures, Ellie often felt like an outsider, even among the outcasts. She would listen to their conversations about men they hoped to meet or places they wanted to go, knowing that such dreams were not for her. On quiet evenings, Ellie would sit by her small window and watch normal families going about their lives. She would see mothers walking with their children, couples holding hands as they strolled through the town square, and young women getting ready for dances she would never attend. Sometimes the longing for such simple normalcy was almost overwhelming, but Ellie had learned to find satisfaction in smaller things. There was deep joy in successfully treating a patient, in seeing someone's pain ease under her care, in knowing that her unusual life had given her skills that genuinely helped people. When Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter was born with the cord wrapped around her neck, it was Ellie's quick thinking that saved the baby's life. When the blacksmith's apprentice nearly lost his hand in an accident, Ellie's careful stitching prevented permanent damage. These moments of purpose helped balance out the isolation and the constant reminder that she was different. Ellie had made peace with her life, or so she told herself. She had useful work, a roof over her head, and the respect of those who mattered. If she sometimes cried herself to sleep, longing for the touch of someone who could see past her scars to the woman beneath, well, that was a private pain she kept to herself. Winter had been particularly hard that year. The Mercy Home was drafty, and keeping everyone healthy through the cold months was a constant challenge. Ellie had used up most of their medical supplies treating various ailments, and she was beginning to worry about what would happen if someone became seriously ill before spring arrived. As February dragged on with no sign of warmer weather, Ellie found herself spending more time than usual looking out her window at the snow-covered town. She wondered sometimes what her life might have been like if the fire had never happened, if she had grown up to marry and have children like other women. But such thoughts were dangerous territory that led nowhere good. Instead, she focused on the present and the work at hand. There were floors to sweep, meals to prepare, and always someone who needed tending. It was a simple life, perhaps, but it was hers. She had no way of knowing that everything was about to change, that fate was preparing to offer her something she had never dared to hope for. The morning of February 15, 1953, started like any other winter day in Cedar Ridge. The sky was gray and heavy with the promise of more snow, and the wind carried the sharp bite of temperatures well below freezing. Sam Crawford had risen before dawn, as was his habit, to check on his cattle and make sure they had enough hay to get through another bitter day. His prize bull, Thunder, was a massive black Angus that Sam had paid good money for 2 years earlier. The animal was worth nearly as much as some men made in a year, and its offspring would help improve the quality of his entire herd. Thunder was also stubborn, strong-willed, and had a talent for finding weak spots in even the best-built fences. That morning, as Sam made his rounds with a cup of coffee steaming in the cold air, he noticed immediately that something was wrong. The gate to Thunder's pasture stood open, hanging loose on its hinges. Sam's heart sank as he realized what this meant. The bull was loose somewhere, and in a town like Cedar Ridge, a 2,000-pound animal wandering free could cause serious damage. Sam saddled his horse quickly and began following the deep tracks Thunder had left in the snow. The trail led away from the ranch and toward town, which was exactly what Sam had feared. He urged his horse faster, hoping to catch up with the bull before it reached the populated areas where people might be out doing their morning shopping. But Thunder had gotten too much of a head start. By the time Sam reached the outskirts of Cedar Ridge, he could hear shouting and screaming coming from the direction of the town square. His worst fears were coming true. The market square on Saturday mornings was always busy, even in winter. Local farmers brought what goods they had stored from the harvest, women shopped for supplies for the week ahead, and children played in the spaces between the stalls. It was into this peaceful scene that Thunder had charged, confused by the strange sights and sounds and probably frightened by all the people. When Sam arrived at the square, chaos had already erupted. Market stalls were overturned with vegetables and preserved goods scattered across the snowy ground. People were screaming and running in all directions, some climbing onto wagons or scrambling up onto building porches to get away from the massive bull. Thunder stood in the center of the square, head lowered and sides heaving. The animal was clearly agitated and dangerous, unsure of where it was or how to get back to familiar territory. Sam could see immediately that trying to approach the bull in this state would be risky for everyone involved. "Everyone stay back," Sam shouted as he dismounted. "Don't make any sudden movements." But it was too late for some people to escape. Near the overturned vegetable stand, an elderly woman lay on the ground, clearly injured. Sam recognized her immediately as Mrs. Henderson, the wife of the town's doctor. She was well liked by everyone, known for her kindness to children and her charity work with the church. Mrs. Henderson was conscious but obviously in severe pain. Her left leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and blood was seeping through her winter coat from where Thunder's hooves had struck her during his panicked charge through the market. She needed medical attention immediately, but Doc Henderson was out of town delivering a baby at one of the outlying farms. "Someone get Doc Henderson," shouted Mayor Williams, but several voices called back that the doctor wasn't available. "He's been at the Morrison place since yesterday," called out Mrs. Patterson. "That baby was coming breech, and he said he might be there for days." Sam kept one eye on his bull while watching the crowd gather around Mrs. Henderson. The old woman was trying to be brave, but Sam could see she was going into shock. Her face was pale, and she was beginning to shiver uncontrollably despite the heavy blanket someone had thrown over her. "We need to get her to the clinic," someone said, but others pointed out that without the doctor there, they wouldn't know what to do for her injuries. The nearest other doctor was in the county seat, a full day's ride away in good weather. Impossible in the current conditions. It was then that a quiet voice cut through the panic and confusion. "Let me look at her." The crowd parted, and Sam watched as a woman approached Mrs. Henderson with calm, confident steps. He recognized her vaguely as someone who lived at the Mercy Home, though he had never paid much attention to her before. She was tall and moved with purpose, carrying herself with a dignity that seemed out of place given her circumstances. As she knelt beside Mrs. Henderson and began examining her injuries, Sam got his first clear look at her face. The scars were immediately visible, covering the right side of her face and neck with the telltale marks of an old burn. But what struck Sam most was not her disfigurement, but the complete focus and competence with which she worked. "I'm going to need some help," the woman said calmly. "Someone bring me clean cloths and hot water, and I'll need something to use as splints for her leg." "Who are you to be giving orders?" demanded someone from the crowd. "You're not a real doctor." The woman looked up briefly and Sam saw steel in her eyes. "I'm Ellie Hartwell, and I've been trained by Doc Henderson himself. Mrs. Henderson's leg is broken and she's losing blood from a deep gash on her arm. If we don't treat her properly right now, she could die. Something in her voice convinced people to listen. Soon, several women were running to get the supplies she had requested, while others helped clear a space around the injured woman. Sam found himself oddly fascinated by watching Ellie work. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she cleaned the wounds and examined the broken leg. She spoke to Mrs. Henderson in a soothing voice, explaining what she was doing and reassuring her that everything would be fine. When she set the broken bone, her movements were swift and sure despite Mrs. Henderson's cry of pain. "I know it hurts," Ellie said gently, "but the bone needs to be straight for it to heal properly." "You're doing beautifully, Mrs. Henderson. Just breathe deeply and try to relax." Sam was amazed by how calm everyone became when Ellie took charge. Her quiet confidence seemed to spread to those around her, and even Mrs. Henderson stopped crying and began to breathe more normally. This was clearly a woman who had dealt with medical emergencies before. As Ellie worked, Sam became aware that he was staring at her with an intensity that had nothing to do with concern for Mrs. Henderson. There was something about this woman that he couldn't quite name. Despite her scarred face, or perhaps because of the strength it represented, she was compelling in a way he hadn't expected. When Ellie finished bandaging Mrs. Henderson's wounds and securing the splint to her leg, the old woman was resting comfortably and her color had improved significantly. The bleeding had stopped and the break was properly set. "She needs to stay warm and quiet for the next few days," Ellie told the crowd. "Someone should sit with her and make sure she drinks plenty of water. The leg should heal fine if she doesn't put weight on it for at least 6 weeks." "How do we know you've done it right?" asked Nancy Roberts, who had pushed through the crowd to see what was happening. Nancy had never liked the attention that Ellie received for her medical skills. "Because Mrs. Henderson is alive and stable," Ellie replied simply, "which she might not have been if we'd waited for help to arrive from somewhere else." Sam realized that in all the excitement over Mrs. Henderson's injury, everyone had forgotten about Thunder. The bull had calmed down somewhat and was now standing near the church steps, looking around nervously but no longer charging around the square. Working carefully and speaking in low, soothing tones, Sam managed to get a rope around Thunder's neck and lead him away from the crowd. The bull followed without much resistance, probably relieved to be moving away from all the strange smells and sounds of the town square. But even as Sam led his bull back toward the ranch, he found his thoughts returning to the woman who had saved Mrs. Henderson's life. There had been something remarkable about watching her work, something that had stirred feelings in him that he thought had died with Martha. That evening, as Sam sat alone in his kitchen picking at another untouched dinner, he couldn't stop thinking about Ellie Hartwell. He had seen courage before, but there had been something different about her calm competence in the face of crisis. She hadn't been seeking attention or praise. She had simply seen someone who needed help and had provided it with skill and compassion. For the first time in months, Sam found himself curious about another person. Who was this woman who lived at the Mercy home? What had brought her there? And how had she learned such impressive medical skills? And why couldn't he stop thinking about the gentle way she had spoken to Mrs. Henderson, or the strength he had seen in her eyes when others questioned her authority? As he prepared for bed that night, Sam realized something that surprised him. For the first time since Martha's death, he had gone an entire day without thinking constantly about his grief. The encounter at the market square had awakened something in him that he thought was gone forever, a genuine interest in life beyond his own sorrow. Sam Crawford spent the next 3 days thinking about Ellie Hartwell, and each day his conviction grew stronger. He had watched her save a life with skill that rivaled any doctor he had ever seen, and he couldn't shake the memory of her calm competence in the face of crisis. More than that, he found himself remembering the gentleness in her voice when she spoke to Mrs. Henderson, and the way she had stood up to the people who questioned her authority. On the 3rd evening after the incident at the market square, Sam made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. He bathed carefully, put on his best shirt and jacket, and combed his hair with more attention than he had paid to his appearance in months. Then he walked into town, his boots crunching on the frozen ground as he made his way toward the Mercy Home for Wayward Women. The 2-story building looked forbidding in the twilight, its windows glowing yellow from the oil lamps within. Sam had never set foot inside the place, and he wasn't entirely sure what he would find there. But his mind was made up, and Samuel Crawford was not a man to change course once he had decided on something. He knocked firmly on the front door and waited, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. After a few moments, the door opened to reveal a stern-faced woman in her 50s with graying hair, pulled back severely from her face. "Yes?" she said, looking Sam up and down with obvious suspicion. "What do you want here?" "I'm Sam Crawford," he said, removing his hat. "I own the ranch outside of town. I'd like to speak with Miss Ellie Hartwell, if I may." The woman's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Ellie? What business could you possibly have with one of my girls?" "It's personal business, ma'am. I'd appreciate the chance to speak with her privately." Mrs. Crawford, who ran the Mercy Home, studied Sam's face for a long moment. She had heard about the incident at the market square, and she knew that Ellie had impressed people with her medical skills. But it was unusual for a respectable rancher to come calling on one of her residents, especially one with Ellie's obvious disadvantages. "I suppose it would be all right," she said finally, stepping aside to let him in. "But the conversation will take place in the front parlor with the door open, and I'll be nearby. We maintain proper standards here, Mr. Crawford." "I wouldn't expect anything less, ma'am," Sam replied, stepping into the warmly lit hallway. The inside of the Mercy Home was cleaner and more comfortable than Sam had expected. The furniture was simple but well maintained, and there were even a few homey touches like handmade quilts and dried flower arrangements. He could hear women's voices from somewhere deeper in the building, along with the sounds of evening activities, dishes being washed, chairs scraping across floors, quiet conversations. "Wait here," Mrs. Crawford instructed, showing him into a small parlor furnished with a horsehair sofa and 2 wooden chairs. "I'll fetch Ellie." Sam sat down on one of the chairs and tried to organize his thoughts. Now that he was actually here, he felt nervous about what he was going to say. He had rehearsed this conversation in his mind dozens of times over the past 3 days, but suddenly all his carefully planned words seemed inadequate. After what felt like an eternity, he heard footsteps in the hallway. Ellie appeared in the doorway looking puzzled and slightly worried. She had changed from her work clothes into a simple brown dress that brought out the warm color of her eyes, and her hair was neatly braided and pinned up. "Mr. Crawford?" she said, stepping into the parlor but remaining standing. "Mrs. Crawford said you wanted to speak with me. Is everything all right? Is Mrs. Henderson having problems with her leg?" "No, ma'am," Sam said, rising to his feet. "Mrs. Henderson is doing fine, thanks to you. Please, won't you sit down?" Ellie perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands folded carefully in her lap. Sam could see that she was trying to angle her face so that the scarred side was less visible, a habit he suspected she had developed over many years. It made something twist painfully in his chest. "Miss Hartwell," he began, then stopped and cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about what happened the other day at the market square. About how you saved Mrs. Henderson's life." "I just did what needed doing," Ellie said quietly. "Anyone with medical training would have done the same. But not everyone would have had the courage to step forward," Sam replied. "And not everyone would have had the skill to do it right. I was impressed by what I saw." Ellie looked confused. "I'm glad I could help, but I don't understand why you've come here to tell me this." Sam took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been preparing for, but his heart was beating so hard he was sure she could hear it. "Miss Hartwell, I have a proposition for you. A business proposition." "A business proposition?" Ellie's voice was careful, guarded. "Yes. You see, I run a large ranch with over 20 men working for me. We're isolated out there, and accidents happen fairly regularly. Men get kicked by horses, cut by tools, injured moving cattle. Right now, when someone gets hurt badly, we have to either ride into town for Doc Henderson or try to patch them up ourselves with whatever supplies we have on hand." Ellie nodded slowly, beginning to see where this might be leading. "I need someone with medical skills living at the ranch," Sam continued. "Someone who could treat injuries when they happen, prevent infections, maybe help with the birthing when our animals have trouble. It would be steady work, good pay, and comfortable living conditions." "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity for someone," Ellie said carefully. "But I'm not sure I understand why you're offering it to me specifically." Sam looked directly at her, meeting her eyes without flinching from the scarred side of her face. "Because you're the best healer I've seen outside of a real doctor, and because I think you deserve better than living in a charity home." Ellie felt her cheeks flush. "Mr. Crawford, that's very kind of you. But I should point out that it wouldn't be proper for an unmarried woman to live alone on a ranch with 20 men. People would talk." "You're absolutely right," Sam said, "which is why I'm not just offering you work. I'm asking you to marry me." The words hung in the air between them like something solid. Ellie stared at him in complete shock, sure that she had misheard him. "I beg your pardon," she said faintly. "I'm asking you to be my wife," Sam repeated, his voice steady despite the racing of his heart. "It would be a practical arrangement, beneficial to both of us. I need a wife who can help run the ranch and tend to medical needs. You need security and a home of your own." Ellie's mind was reeling. This was the last thing she had expected when Mrs. Crawford told her that Sam Crawford wanted to see her. "Mr. Crawford, I don't know what to say. This is very sudden." "I know it is," Sam acknowledged, "and I want to be completely honest with you about what I'm offering. I lost my wife 6 months ago, and I'm not looking for a romantic marriage. What I'm proposing is a partnership between two practical people who could benefit from combining their resources and skills." "A marriage of convenience," Ellie said slowly. "Exactly. You would have my name, my protection, and a comfortable home. I would have your medical skills and help managing the household. We would both benefit from the arrangement." Ellie was quiet for a long moment, trying to process what she was hearing. Part of her wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Samuel Crawford, one of the most successful ranchers in the county, proposing marriage to the scarred woman from the Mercy home. But another part of her was intrigued by the practical sense of what he was suggesting. "Mr. Crawford," she said finally, "may I ask why you've chosen me for this arrangement? Surely there are other women in town who would be more suitable as wives." Sam had expected this question, and he had thought carefully about how to answer it. "Miss Hartwell, I've seen you work under pressure. I've watched how you treat people with kindness and skill. Those are the qualities I need in a partner, not social connections or beauty." The word beauty made Ellie's hand move unconsciously to her scarred cheek. "You should know that my appearance makes me difficult to be seen with in public. People stare and they whisper. That could reflect badly on you." "Let them whisper," Sam said firmly. "I've seen what you can do, and that matters more to me than what small-minded people might say." From the doorway came a loud gasp. Both Sam and Ellie turned to see several of the Mercy Home residents gathered in the hallway, clearly eavesdropping on the conversation. Mrs. Crawford shooed them away with sharp words, but the damage was done. Word of this unprecedented proposal would spread through the building within minutes. "I realize this is a lot to think about," Sam said, turning back to Ellie. "If you need time to consider it—" "No," Ellie interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I don't need time to think about it." Sam's heart sank, sure that she was about to refuse him. "Mr. Crawford," Ellie continued, "you're offering me something I never thought I would have. A home, security, useful work, and respectability. I would be foolish to refuse such an opportunity." "Then you'll marry me?" Sam asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Yes," Ellie said simply. "I'll marry you." Sam felt a smile spread across his face, the first genuine smile he had worn since Martha's death. "There's one more thing," he said. "If we're going to do this, I think we should do it immediately. No sense in waiting when two practical people have made a practical decision." Within an hour of Ellie's acceptance, the Mercy Home was buzzing with activity unlike anything its residents had ever witnessed. Word of the proposal had spread through the building faster than wildfire, and every woman in the place seemed to have an opinion about what was happening. "I can't believe it," whispered Lucy Thompson, one of the younger residents. "Sam Crawford actually proposed to Ellie?" "Must be desperate for help on that ranch," muttered Nancy Roberts with her usual spite. "No man would marry her for any other reason." But Mrs. Crawford, who had been listening from the hallway, stepped into the parlor with a stern expression. "Nancy Roberts, that's quite enough. Mr. Crawford has made an honorable proposal to a good woman, and I won't have you poisoning it with your jealousy." Ellie barely heard the whispered conversation swirling around her. She felt as if she were moving through a dream, going through the motions of preparing for something that couldn't possibly be real. Less than 2 hours ago, she had been washing dishes and preparing for another ordinary evening at the Mercy Home. Now she was about to become Mrs. Samuel Crawford. "You'll need something proper to wear," Mrs. Crawford said practically, taking charge of the situation as she always did. "Lucy, go fetch that blue dress from the donation box, the one that came in last week. It should fit Ellie well enough." "But Mrs. Crawford," protested one of the other women, "that's the best dress we've had donated in months. Shouldn't it go to someone who really needs it? And who needs it more than a woman getting married in an hour?" Mrs. Crawford replied sharply, "Now hurry up and get it. While the women bustled around gathering clothes and offering advice, Sam had walked to the other side of town to speak with Judge Morrison. The judge was a practical man who had performed many hasty weddings over his 20 years on the bench, but even he seemed surprised by the speed of this particular request. "Sam, are you sure about this?" Judge Morrison asked, setting down his evening newspaper. "It's not that I object to the young lady. I heard she did fine work helping Mrs. Henderson the other day. But marriage is a serious business and you two hardly know each other." "Judge, I've been thinking about this for days," Sam replied. "Ellie Hartwell is exactly what I need. A capable woman who can help run the ranch and tend to medical needs. And I can offer her security and respectability. It makes perfect sense." Judge Morrison studied Sam's face carefully. "And what about love, son? Martha was the love of your life. Don't you think you owe it to yourself to wait and see if that kind of feeling might come again?" Sam was quiet for a moment, thinking about his late wife. "Martha was special, Judge. I'll never stop loving her memory. But I'm not looking for that kind of marriage again. What I'm offering Ellie is partnership and respect, which is more than most women in her situation can hope for." The judge nodded slowly. He had seen enough of life to know that marriages built on practical foundations often lasted longer than those built on passion alone. "All right, Sam. If you're both certain this is what you want, I'll perform the ceremony. But I'll want to speak with Miss Hartwell first, make sure she's entering into this freely." "Of course," Sam agreed. "I wouldn't want it any other way." Back at the Mercy home, Ellie was standing in front of a cracked mirror while the other women fussed over her appearance. The blue dress that Lucy had fetched was simple but well made, with a modest neckline and long sleeves that covered most of her scars. It fit her better than anything she had worn in years. "You look beautiful," said Mrs. Crawford softly, and for once there was no sarcasm or criticism in her voice. "That color brings out your eyes." Ellie touched the scarred side of her face self-consciously. "Do you think I should try to hide this more? Maybe braid my hair differently?" "Nonsense," Mrs. Crawford said firmly. "Mr. Crawford has seen your face and he still asked you to marry him. A man who can see past scars to the woman beneath them is worth marrying." As the women helped her get ready, Ellie found herself thinking about what her life might be like as Sam Crawford's wife. She had never been to his ranch, but she knew it was one of the largest and most successful in the area. More importantly, she would finally have a place where she belonged, where her skills would be valued and put to good use. "Are you nervous?" asked Lucy, who was helping to pin Ellie's hair into a neat bun. "Terrified," Ellie admitted honestly, "but also excited. I never thought I would have a chance at a normal life." "It may not be a conventional marriage," said Mrs. Crawford, "but from what I can see, you and Mr. Crawford are well suited to each other. You're both practical people who understand the value of hard work." When Sam returned to the Mercy home, he found Ellie waiting in the parlor, transformed by the simple blue dress and the careful attention to her hair. For a moment he was struck by how lovely she looked, not in spite of her scars, but somehow because of the strength and character they represented. "You look very nice," he said simply, and was rewarded by a genuine smile that lit up her whole face. "Thank you," she replied. "I should probably gather my things." "There's not much to gather," Ellie said with a slightly embarrassed laugh. "I don't have many possessions." "We can remedy that," Sam said. "But for now, just bring whatever you need for tonight. We can come back for anything else later." Ellie's few belongings fit easily into a single carpet bag: a few dresses, some undergarments, her medical supplies, and the small collection of books that were her most treasured possessions. As she packed, she felt a mixture of excitement and sadness at leaving the only home she had known for 3 years. The walk to Judge Morrison's house took only 10 minutes, but it felt like the longest 10 minutes of Ellie's life. Word of the impending wedding had somehow spread through the small town, and curious faces appeared at windows as they passed. Some people stared openly at the unlikely couple, while others whispered behind their curtains. "Having second thoughts?" Sam asked quietly as they walked. "No," Ellie replied firmly. "Are you?" "Not a one," he said, and meant it. Judge Morrison's house was warm and welcoming, with a fire crackling in the hearth and the smell of his wife's cooking filling the air. Mrs. Morrison, a kind woman in her 60s, greeted them with genuine warmth. "What a lovely surprise," she said, taking Ellie's hands in hers. "I'm so pleased to meet you, dear. I heard about what you did for Mrs. Henderson. The whole town is talking about your quick thinking." Before performing the ceremony, Judge Morrison took Ellie aside for a private conversation, as he had promised Sam he would do. "Miss Hartwell," he said gently, "I need to ask you directly. Are you entering into this marriage of your own free will? You're not being pressured or coerced in any way?" "No, sir," Ellie replied without hesitation. "Mr. Crawford has made me an honorable proposal that will benefit both of us. I'm grateful for the opportunity. And you understand that this will be a legal marriage in every sense? You'll be taking on all the responsibilities and gaining all the rights of a wife?" "I understand, Judge Morrison. Mr. Crawford has been very clear about what he expects from this arrangement." Satisfied that Ellie was acting freely, Judge Morrison returned to the parlor where Sam was waiting nervously by the fireplace. The ceremony itself was simple and brief, lasting less than 10 minutes. There were no flowers, no music, and no guests other than Mrs. Morrison, who served as witness. But when Judge Morrison asked if they promised to honor and respect each other as husband and wife, both Sam and Ellie spoke their vows with a sincerity that impressed the judge. When Sam slipped the simple gold band he had purchased at the general store onto Ellie's finger, his hands were steady and sure. "You may kiss the bride," Judge Morrison announced. But Sam hesitated, unsure of what was appropriate given the nature of their arrangement. Ellie solved the problem by stepping forward and offering her cheek, which Sam kissed gently and respectfully. It was their first physical contact, and both were surprised by how natural it felt. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Crawford," said Mrs. Morrison warmly. "I hope you'll be very happy together." As they walked back through town toward Sam's waiting wagon, Ellie felt as if she were floating. The simple gold ring on her finger caught the light from the street lamps, and she kept looking down at it in amazement. She was married. She was Mrs. Samuel Crawford. After 28 years of being alone and unwanted, she finally had a place where she belonged. The ride to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts about what they had just done. The night was clear and cold, with stars visible in the black sky above them. When they finally reached the ranch house, Sam helped Ellie down from the wagon and carried her small bag to the front door. "Welcome home," he said simply, opening the door and stepping aside to let her enter first. Ellie walked into her new home, taking in the comfortable furniture, the stone fireplace, and the sense of solid permanence that seemed to fill every corner. It was larger and more comfortable than anywhere she had ever lived. But more importantly, it felt welcoming. "I hope you'll be comfortable here," Sam said, suddenly feeling awkward about the practical arrangements they would need to discuss. "I've prepared the spare bedroom for you. I thought, that is, I assumed you would prefer your own space." "That's very considerate," Ellie replied, grateful that he had thought to address what could have been an uncomfortable situation. The first morning of Ellie's new life as Mrs. Crawford began before sunrise, just as it had at the Mercy home. But instead of lighting a stove in a drafty charity house, she found herself in a warm, well-appointed kitchen that was now her own domain. Sam had already risen and gone out to tend to the morning chores, leaving a note on the kitchen table that simply read, "Coffee is in the blue tin. Make yourself comfortable." Ellie stood in the middle of the kitchen, taking in her surroundings. The room was larger than any she had ever worked in, with plenty of counter space, good lighting from the windows, and a modern wood-burning stove that looked like it had been recently installed. But it was also clearly the kitchen of a man who had been living alone, functional but lacking the organized efficiency that a woman's touch could provide. She made coffee and breakfast for herself, then settled into exploring her new home more thoroughly than she had been able to the night before. The house was solidly built and comfortable, with good furniture and evidence of a woman's influence in the curtains, quilts, and small decorative touches that must have belonged to Sam's first wife. Ellie found herself particularly drawn to a small sewing room that still contained baskets of mending and half-finished projects. She touched the fabric gently, imagining the woman who had sat in this chair working on these pieces. It didn't make her jealous. Instead, she felt a strange kinship with Martha Crawford, a sense that they might have been friends under different circumstances. When Sam returned to the house for breakfast, he found Ellie in the kitchen with coffee ready and eggs cooking on the stove. She had already swept the floor and organized the pantry shelves, small improvements that he noticed immediately. "Good morning," she said with a shy smile. "I hope you don't mind that I rearranged a few things. I wanted to make myself useful right away." "I don't mind at all," Sam replied, hanging his hat on the hook by the door. "It smells better in here than it has in months. Over breakfast, they began the delicate process of learning how to live together. Sam told her about the ranch, how many cattle they ran, which pastures were used for what purposes, and which of his workers had been with him the longest. Ellie listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions and making mental notes about the operation she was now part of. "Jake Miller has been my foreman for 5 years," Sam explained. "He's a good man, reliable. Billy Thompson is young but eager to learn. Most of the men have been with me for at least 2 years, so they know the routine pretty well." "And medical emergencies?" Ellie asked. "How often do they occur?" "More often than I'd like," Sam admitted. "Last month, one of the boys got kicked by a horse and couldn't work for 2 weeks because we didn't know how to treat his injured ribs properly. And during calving season, we sometimes lose animals that a skilled person might be able to save." Ellie nodded, already planning how she could organize medical supplies and set up a proper treatment area. "I'll need to know what supplies you have on hand and what I should order for the future." Their first test as a working partnership came that very afternoon. Sam was in the barn with Jake Miller, examining a mare that was having difficulty with her pregnancy, when Billy Thompson came running from the south pasture with news that one of the men had been injured. "It's Rodriguez," Billy gasped, out of breath from running. "A tree branch fell on him while he was clearing brush. His arm looks real bad, boss." Sam's first instinct was to saddle a horse and ride for Doc Henderson in town, just as he had done for every previous emergency. But then he remembered that he now had medical help right in his own house. "Get Mrs. Crawford," he told Billy. "Tell her to bring whatever medical supplies she thinks she'll need." Ellie appeared within minutes, carrying a bag that she had already packed with bandages, antiseptic, and other necessities. She had changed from her house dress into practical clothes suitable for outdoor work, and her hair was pinned back securely. "How bad is it?" she asked as they hurried toward the injured man. "Don't know yet," Sam replied, "but Rodriguez is tough. If he's not complaining, it must be serious." They found Rodriguez sitting against a fence post, his face pale and his left arm hanging at an unnatural angle. The other ranch hands had gathered around him, but they stepped back respectfully when Sam and Ellie arrived. Ellie knelt beside the injured man and began examining his arm with gentle but thorough hands. Rodriguez gritted his teeth but didn't cry out, even when she probed the obviously broken bone. "It's broken in 2 places," she announced after a few minutes, "and there's a deep gash that's going to need stitching. But if we set it properly and keep it clean, it should heal fine." "You can do that here?" asked Jake Miller with obvious relief. "We don't need to take him into town." "Not necessary," Ellie said confidently. "Sam, I'll need you to help me hold him steady while I set the bones. The rest of you men can help by bringing me some straight pieces of wood for splints and some clean cloth for bandages." What followed was Ellie's first real test as the ranch's medical expert, and she passed with flying colors. Working with calm efficiency, she cleaned the wound, set the broken bones, and secured the arm in a proper splint. Rodriguez, who had been expecting a painful trip to town, followed by weeks of inadequate care, was amazed by her skill. "Senora Crawford," he said gratefully when she finished, "you have hands like an angel. This feels better already." The other ranch hands were equally impressed. They had heard about the new Mrs. Crawford's medical abilities, but seeing them in action was different from hearing stories. Word spread quickly through the bunkhouse that evening. They now had their own doctor right on the ranch. Over the following weeks, Ellie established herself as an indispensable part of ranch life. She organized the medical supplies into a proper infirmary in one of the unused rooms, created detailed records of each worker's health issues, and instituted basic hygiene practices that significantly reduced minor illnesses. But her contributions went far beyond medical care. She transformed the ranch house into a genuinely welcoming home, not by making it fancy, but by making it more functional and comfortable. She organized Sam's paperwork, improved the meals to include more variety and nutrition, and created systems that made daily life run more smoothly. "I don't know how you managed without a woman's touch for so long," said Mrs. Patterson when she came to visit 3 weeks after the wedding. "This place looks like a real home again." Sam found himself looking forward to coming inside at the end of each day. The house was warm and welcoming, dinner was always ready at a reasonable hour, and Ellie proved to be an intelligent conversationalist who was genuinely interested in the ranch operations. "How did the meeting with the cattle buyer go?" she would ask, or, "Did you decide which pasture to use for the new calves?" Her questions showed that she was paying attention to the business aspects of the ranch, not just the domestic duties. The ranch hands quickly came to respect and appreciate their new boss's wife. She treated their injuries and illnesses with professional competence, but also with a kindness that was rare in their experience. When young Billy Thompson came down with a fever, she sat up with him through the night, making sure he drank enough fluids and monitoring his condition carefully. "She's a good woman, boss," Jake Miller told Sam one evening. "The men all like her. She treats everyone with respect no matter what their position." Sam was pleased to hear this, but he was also beginning to notice other changes in himself. For the first time since Martha's death, he was sleeping through the night without waking up in a cold sweat from nightmares about losing someone he loved. The house felt alive again, not like a museum dedicated to past happiness. He also found himself genuinely enjoying Ellie's company. She was well-read and intelligent, with opinions on everything from politics to literature. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and discuss the book she had brought from the Mercy home, or debate the merits of different approaches to cattle breeding. "I never expected to find such good conversation in a marriage of convenience," Sam admitted to himself one evening as he watched Ellie reading by lamplight. She was absorbed in a medical text, making notes in the margins, and there was something deeply attractive about her complete focus and intelligence. The most surprising development was how quickly the awkwardness between them had faded. Within a month, they had developed comfortable routines and easy communication. Sam no longer felt strange about discussing ranch business with her, and Ellie had stopped being nervous about expressing her opinions on household matters. "I think we should plant a larger vegetable garden this spring," she said one evening over dinner. "With this many people to feed, we could save money by growing more of our own food." "That makes sense," Sam agreed. "Do you know much about gardening?" "Some. And I'd like to start an herb garden specifically for medical purposes. There are several plants that would be useful for treating common ailments." Sam found himself impressed once again by her practical thinking. Every suggestion she made was aimed at improving their lives or the ranch operation in some concrete way. By the end of their second month as husband and wife, both Sam and Ellie had to admit that their arrangement was working better than either had dared to hope. The ranch was running more efficiently, the workers were healthier and happier. Spring came early to Wyoming that year, melting the snow and bringing the first wildflowers to bloom along the creek that ran through Sam's property. With the warmer weather came calving season, the busiest and most demanding time of year on any cattle ranch. It was during these intense weeks that the partnership between Sam and Ellie truly deepened into something neither had expected. The first sign that their relationship was changing came on a morning in late March. Sam had been up all night with a cow having difficulty giving birth, and he stumbled into the kitchen at dawn, exhausted and covered in mud. Instead of simply nodding and going about her business as she might have done in the early days of their marriage, Ellie immediately poured him coffee and guided him to a chair. "You need to eat something," she said gently, already cracking eggs into a pan. "And then you need to sleep for a few hours before you fall over." "Can't sleep," Sam mumbled, rubbing his tired eyes. "Too much work to do." "The work will still be there after you rest," Ellie replied firmly. "Jake can handle things for a few hours. You're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." What struck Sam wasn't just her practical concern, but the gentle way she placed her hand on his shoulder as she spoke. It was the first time she had touched him since their wedding kiss, and the warmth of her palm seemed to burn through his shirt. "Besides," she continued, oblivious to the effect her touch was having on him, "if you get sick, who's going to take care of you? I'm a good healer, but I can't work miracles." Sam looked up at her, really looked at her, and felt something shift in his chest. When had he stopped noticing her scars and started seeing only her kind eyes and gentle smile? When had her presence become so comforting that coming home felt like a relief instead of just another chore? That same afternoon, while Sam slept, Ellie received her own revelation about the changing nature of their relationship. She was in the barn checking on a calf that had been born weak when she heard shouting from the pasture. Running outside, she saw Sam's horse galloping toward the barn with an empty saddle. Terror struck her like a physical blow. Sam was somewhere out there, possibly injured or worse, and the thought of losing him made her knees weak with panic. She had never experienced fear like this, not even during the fire that had scarred her. This was deeper, more personal, the fear of losing someone who had become precious to her. She saddled her own horse quickly and rode out toward the south pasture where Sam had been working. She found him half a mile from the barn, sitting on the ground and holding his ankle, while his horse grazed nearby, apparently uninjured but free of its rider. "Sam," she called out, riding hard toward him. "Are you hurt?" "Just twisted my ankle when I got thrown," he called back. Nothing serious. But when Ellie dismounted and knelt beside him to examine the injury, she was shaking so badly that her hands trembled against his boot. The relief of finding him relatively unharmed was overwhelming. "Hey," Sam said softly, noticing her distress. "I'm fine, Ellie, really. Just a minor sprain." "I thought," she began, then stopped, realizing what she had been about to reveal. "I thought I might lose you," she had been going to say. When did that become something that would devastate her? "You thought what?" Sam asked gently. Ellie looked into his concerned eyes and felt her heart skip a beat. "I thought you might be seriously injured," she said, which was true, if not the whole truth. As she helped him back onto his horse and they rode slowly toward the house, both of them were quiet, lost in thoughts about what had just happened. The fear and relief they had each felt seemed too intense for a mere business partnership. The turning point in their relationship came during a fierce thunderstorm in early May. Ellie had always been afraid of storms. A legacy of the night her family's cabin had burned down during similar weather. She usually managed to hide her fear, but this particular storm was violent, with lightning that lit up the sky and thunder that shook the windows of the house. Sam found her in the kitchen at midnight, sitting at the table with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold. She was trying to read, but he could see that her hands were shaking slightly every time the thunder rolled across the valley. "Can't sleep either?" he asked quietly, not wanting to startle her. Ellie looked up with a grateful smile. "Storms have always made me nervous," she admitted. "I know it's foolish." "It's not foolish," Sam said, settling into the chair across from her. "We all have things that frighten us." A particularly loud crack of thunder made Ellie flinch, and without thinking, Sam reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The gesture was meant to be comforting, but the moment their skin touched, both of them felt an electric connection that had nothing to do with the storm outside. They sat like that in the dim lamplight, hands touching across the table, not speaking but somehow communicating more than they ever had with words. When Ellie began to cry softly, not from fear of the storm, but from the overwhelming realization that she was falling in love with her husband, Sam stood and came around to her side of the table. "Ellie," he said gently, "what's wrong?" "I'm scared," she whispered, but they both knew she wasn't talking about the thunder anymore. Sam knelt beside her chair and took both of her hands in his. "Scared of what?" "Of this," she said, gesturing between them. "Of what's happening between us. This wasn't supposed to be part of our arrangement." "I know," Sam said quietly. "I've been feeling it too." They looked at each other in the flickering lamplight, both of them acknowledging what had been growing between them for weeks. This was no longer a marriage of convenience. Somewhere between treating injured ranch hands and sharing evening conversations, they had fallen in love. "I never expected to feel this way again," Sam said honestly. "After Martha died, I thought that part of my life was over." "And I never expected to feel this way at all," Ellie replied. "I thought love was something that happened to other people, not to women like me." Sam reached up and gently touched the scarred side of her face, something he had never done before. "Women like you? Women who are damaged," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not damaged," Sam said firmly. "You're the strongest, kindest, most capable woman I've ever known. These scars don't change that. They're proof of what you've survived." When he leaned forward and kissed her gently on the lips, a real kiss this time, not the formal peck they had shared at their wedding, Ellie felt as if her heart might burst with joy. This was what she had never dared to hope for. Being loved not despite her imperfections, but as a whole person whose worth was measured by more than her appearance. The storm raged outside for hours, but neither of them noticed. They sat together in the kitchen, talking and holding hands, sharing the stories of their lives that had led them to this moment. Sam told her about his childhood on the ranch, his dreams of building something lasting, and the depth of his grief when Martha died. Ellie told him about the fire, the years of loneliness at the Mercy home, and the walls she had built around her heart to protect herself from disappointment. "I used to watch other families through my window at the Mercy home," she confessed. "I would see couples walking together, children playing with their parents, and I would wish I could be part of something like that. But I never really believed it could happen for me. It's happening now, Sam said simply. We're a family. Ellie, not the conventional kind, maybe, but a real family nonetheless. As dawn broke and the storm finally passed, they were still sitting together, planning a future that was so much brighter than either had imagined. They talked about expanding the herb garden, maybe adding rooms to the house, and the possibility that their practical partnership might produce the children that both had secretly longed for. Are you sure about this? Ellie asked as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows. About us becoming a real married couple? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back to our previous arrangement. Sam stood and pulled her gently to her feet, wrapping his arms around her in their first real embrace. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, he said against her hair. I love you, Ellie Crawford. Not because it's convenient or practical, but because you've become the best part of my life. I love you too, she whispered back, finally allowing herself to say the words she had been carrying in her heart for weeks. More than I ever thought possible. When Jake Miller arrived at the ranch house later that morning to discuss the day's work, he found Sam and Ellie in the kitchen, making breakfast together and sharing the kind of comfortable intimacy that spoke of a genuine partnership. The change in both of them was immediately obvious. Sam looked happier than he had since before Martha's death, and Ellie glowed with a confidence and contentment that transformed her completely. Well, I'll be, Jake said to Billy Thompson later that day. Looks like the boss and his wife have figured out they're actually in love with each other. About time, Billy replied with a grin. Anyone with eyes could see it was heading that way. But for Sam and Ellie, the realization still felt miraculous. They had entered into marriage as strangers seeking mutual benefit, and had discovered something far more valuable than either had dared to hope for. Love, it seemed, had a way of blooming in the most unexpected places. 1 year after their hastily arranged wedding, Sam and Ellie Crawford stood on the front porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming mountains in shades of gold and purple. It was their first wedding anniversary, though neither had mentioned the date until Ellie appeared at breakfast that morning, wearing the same blue dress she had worn to their wedding ceremony. Happy anniversary, she had said simply, setting his coffee beside his plate with a smile that made his heart race, just as it had that first night they admitted they loved each other. Now, as they stood together in the evening light, Sam marveled at how completely his life had changed. The ranch was more prosperous than it had ever been, thanks in large part to Ellie's medical care keeping the workers healthy, and her practical improvements to daily operations. But more importantly, he had found happiness again, a different kind than he had known with Martha, but no less precious. Do you ever regret it? Ellie asked quietly, leaning against the porch railing. Marrying me so quickly, I mean, without really knowing what you were getting into? Sam moved to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on top of her head. Never, he said firmly. Not for one single moment, do you? Ellie relaxed into his embrace, still amazed after all these months that she was allowed to be held like this, loved like this. How could I regret the best year of my life? The transformation in both of them over the past 12 months had been remarkable. Sam had regained the easy laughter and optimism that his workers remembered from before Martha's death. He threw himself into ranch work with renewed energy, excited about plans for expansion and improvements that he and Ellie discussed over their evening meals. Ellie's changes were even more dramatic. The quiet, withdrawn woman who had lived at the Mercy home had blossomed into someone confident and assured. She no longer tried to hide her scars or apologize for taking up space. Instead, she carried herself with the dignity of a woman who knew she was valued and loved. The townspeople of Cedar Ridge had initially been skeptical of the unusual marriage between the successful rancher and the scarred woman from the charity home. But over time, even the biggest gossips had been forced to admit that the Crawford Ranch had never been better run, and that Ellie had become one of the most respected healers in the county. I don't care what anyone said at first, Mrs. Patterson declared at the church social just the week before. Ellie Crawford has saved more lives in this town than anyone except Doc Henderson himself. And you can see how happy Sam is. Sometimes practical marriages work out better than the romantic kind. Doc Henderson himself had become one of Ellie's strongest supporters. Now in his 70s and beginning to slow down, He had come to rely on her assistance more and more frequently. That woman has a gift, he told anyone who would listen. She's got better instincts about healing than half the doctors I went to school with. The ranch hands had long since stopped seeing Ellie as just the boss's wife and had come to regard her as an integral part of their community. When Jake Miller's wife went into labor during a blizzard that made it impossible to get to town, it was Ellie who delivered their son safely. When young Billy Thompson was gored by a bull and nearly died from blood loss, it was Ellie's quick action and skilled hands that saved his life. She's not just a healer, Rodriguez had said after Ellie successfully treated his broken arm. She's family to all of us. The ranch itself had prospered beyond Sam's wildest expectations. With Ellie managing the household efficiently and treating injuries that would have previously kept men out of work for weeks, productivity had increased dramatically. Her herb garden provided remedies for both human and animal ailments, saving money on expensive medicines from town. Her vegetable garden fed the entire crew through the summer months, and her preserved food saw them through the harsh winters. But perhaps most importantly, the ranch house had become a real home again. It wasn't just the physical improvements, though those were significant. Curtains in every window, comfortable furniture arranged for conversation, and the constant smell of good cooking. It was the sense of life and warmth that Ellie brought to every room. Sam's workers often found excuses to linger in the kitchen after meals, drawn by Ellie's gentle conversation and genuine interest in their lives. She remembered birthdays, asked about family members, and created a sense of community that made the ranch feel less like just a workplace and more like a home for everyone who lived there. I never expected to have a real family again.
Jake Miller had confided to Sam just the month before.
But that's what this place feels like now, like we're all part of something bigger. The love between Sam and Ellie had deepened with each passing season. What had begun as mutual respect and physical attraction had grown into the kind of partnership that made both of them stronger. They complemented each other perfectly. His strength and experience with her intelligence and compassion, his knowledge of the land with her understanding of healing and nurturing. Their evening conversations had become the highlight of both their days. They would sit by the fire discussing everything from ranch business to books they had read, from plans for the future to memories of the past. Sam had even begun sharing stories about Martha without feeling guilty, and Ellie listened with the understanding of a woman secure in her husband's love. "I think Martha would have liked you," Sam had said one evening, and Ellie knew it was one of the highest compliments he could give her. "I think I would have liked her too," Ellie had replied. She had good taste in husbands. The physical side of their marriage had developed naturally and beautifully. Sam's gentle patience had helped Ellie overcome her insecurities about her appearance, and she had learned to trust in his genuine desire for her. Their bedroom had become a sanctuary where scars were kissed tenderly, and love was expressed in whispered words and gentle touches. "You are so beautiful," Sam would tell her in the lamplight, tracing the lines of her face with reverent fingers. "Every part of you is beautiful to me." The first time Ellie had believed him completely was the night she realized she was carrying his child. The pregnancy had come as a surprise to both of them, though a welcome one. As she placed Sam's hand on her still flat belly and told him the news, she saw tears of joy in his eyes. "Are you happy?" she had asked, suddenly nervous about how this unexpected development might change their carefully built life together. "Happy?" Sam had laughed, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around the kitchen. "Ellie, I'm the luckiest man in Wyoming, maybe in all of America." The pregnancy had brought them even closer together. Sam became protective without being possessive, making sure Ellie didn't overwork herself while still respecting her need to continue with her healing work. The ranch hands treated her like precious cargo, competing to help with her chores and checking on her constantly. "That baby's going to be the most spoiled child in the county," Ellie had joked to Sam one evening as she watched Rodriguez carefully carrying her medical bag for her. "Good," Sam had replied seriously. "After everything we've both been through, I want our children to grow up knowing they're loved and wanted." As their first anniversary approached, both Sam and Ellie found themselves reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. They had started as strangers making a practical arrangement, but they had built something far more valuable than either had imagined possible. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Ellie asked as they stood together on the porch, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. About this being a partnership between two practical people? I remember, Sam said, tightening his arms around her. I thought I was being so sensible offering you a business arrangement. We were both practical, Ellie laughed softly. I married you because I needed security and a home. You married me because you needed help with the ranch and medical care for your workers. And instead we got the love of a lifetime, Sam murmured against her ear. The best kind of love, Ellie agreed. The kind that grows from respect and partnership, not just passion. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts about the miracle of their marriage. Around them, the ranch settled into its evening rhythms, cattle lowing in the distance, horses nickering softly in the corrals, and the warm glow of lamplight from the bunkhouse where their workers were probably playing cards or writing letters home. I have something for you, Sam said suddenly, pulling a small wrapped package from his pocket. I know we said we weren't going to make a big fuss about our anniversary, but I wanted to mark the occasion somehow. Ellie unwrapped the gift carefully to reveal a beautiful silver locket engraved with wildflowers, the same kind that Sam brought to her every week during the spring and summer months. Inside was a tiny photograph of the two of them taken at last year's church social, both smiling genuinely for the camera. Sam, it's beautiful, she breathed, touching the delicate engraving with gentle fingers. I wanted you to have something that reminded you how far we've come, he said, fastening the chain around her neck, and how much you mean to me. I have something for you too, Ellie said with a shy smile, taking his hand.